Okay, so let me start by talking about the team and our institute a little bit beforehand so that it all makes a little bit more sense. So I'm Cansu. I am working at the Institute for Experiential AI at the Northeastern University. I'm the director of responsible AI practice. And this team that we've been working on this paper with consists of philosophers, computer scientists, physicists. So Tomo is a physicist, Annika is a computer scientist, Laura is a philosopher, and I'm also a philosopher by training. We all work with AI systems, and our main work is to, well, we do research in AI ethics and responsible AI, as well as doing consulting. So the institute has this function of being between the industry and the academia. So we have this fortunate position of working directly with the companies, hearing their problems, and also doing our academic research on the side to come up with the best possible answers that we can think of. So within that context, one of the areas that we are working with is the gaming industry, and figuring out how we can help integrate ethics, AI ethics in particular, into the game design and the gaming world in general, in a way. So in that sense, we are not mainly focusing on the traditional ethical issues in games. Of course, that's relevant because AI in most cases only increases, amplifies the existing ethical issues. So the ones that are already very much talked in the literature is, like how the how the gaming can create addiction. But on the other hand, good games create this flow experience, which is very similar to addiction. So how do we balance these out? What does it mean to protect privacy in terms of within the game, but while keeping a good game experience? How can we make sure that biases are avoided, eliminated as much as possible? How can we ensure that freedom of speech is protected? But while doing so, we can still limit, if possible, eliminate the toxicity in the gaming community. And how can we make sure that any behavior that is not okay, or in particular violent in game, stays in game and does not create real life harm? And also the question, of course, what does it mean to create harm within the game from ethical perspective? So these are sort of like in the background of our work, but when we are working on these things, we are sort of like taking that even a notch up. So the addiction versus flow experience becomes, well, what does it mean to use AI to really personalize games, and how does that compare with manipulation, bio-tracking, as the bio-tracking devices are being more and more integrated into the extended reality, amplification of bias through algorithmic systems, content moderation through algorithmic systems, hence the difficulty in distinguishing between cultural expressions versus toxic expressions, further blurring of the in-game versus real life line, in the sense that as our lives increasingly include more screen time, and the screen is just like right now that we are holding this conference on Zoom, screen is a part of our real life. What does it mean for that line to that separates game from all the other real life screen times? And what does it mean to integrate generative AI into games in terms of intellectual property, in terms of artistic ownership, in terms of control on risks? And all of these things that I just mentioned, I'm going to come back to these with a specific use case. So that's the ethical landscape that we are operating on. And then there is the stakeholders landscape, and where does all of these ethical concerns occur? So obviously we have the designer, we have the player and other players, their interaction, and we have the gaming company. So their interaction mainly occur in the game, but there are also areas where this interaction sort of spills over. So gamer platforms where gamers connect with each other is another area where we are concerned about or we want to keep an eye on in terms of toxicity / freedom of speech, for example. And broader than that, we need to think about the real life. So not real life is a weird expression in this context, but non-virtual life. So what does it mean for a player to interact with the people who are not in the game, but who may have their data and their information shared via the player with the companies with the gaming company that the player is engaging with? What does it mean for third parties to have access to the player information and maybe via them, as I said, to the others? So there are multiple stakeholders. There are sort of like these in circles of immediacy, and all of them have ethical relations with each other. And here's like a very rough way of showing all these ethical ties. I'm not going to go over this. It's just to illustrate that the ethical concern is not between two main groups. There is the designers' choices that have ethical impact on the player, but also players' choices that have impact on the other players or on the non-players, and the players' vulnerability in terms of ethical harms or ethical risks towards the gaming company, and depending on what kind of information flow that the gaming company creates with third parties, the vulnerability that the player and other players and even non-players have towards those third parties. Again, I'm going to get back to these with a concrete example, but just to sort of like paint the landscape that we are thinking of while we are doing responsible AI and AI ethics in gaming. So starting from from very basics, and this is of course like for many this will be very redundant, but in an interdisciplinary conference, I think it's always good to be on the same page about like what do we mean when we say responsible AI. So the scope of responsible AI expands on the content, the process, and the implementation. So we are trying to, when we do responsible AI, what we are trying to do is we are trying to develop and design ethical technology. So whatever decision, whatever choices that go, design choices or data choices that goes into the technology are done in a way that the system itself is likely to create ethically accepted, non-problematic, or even superior outcomes. But of course, the technology does not exist by itself. It's not in the void. There are all the ways that we are creating this technology, the research phase, the testing phase, the A/B testing that's constantly going on in the industry in all platforms. So how do you make sure that these processes of technology development are also ethical? And finally, once we have the technology, in this case, a game, how do we make sure that the implementation of it is ethical? So how do we, in a way, hand it over to the market, to the users, to the consumers, or to third parties who would like to engage with this game or who would like to get information via this game? It's quite a large, so the scope of responsible AI is really large. And in terms of the AI innovation lifecycle, as well as the game development lifecycle, it is very broad. It cannot, we cannot think about ethics or responsible AI only for a particular aspect of the life cycle. So we start from the research phase and we go through, we have questions that keep changing, but they are ethics questions that keep changing, but they are always present throughout the development phase, through the design phase, through deployment phase, through monitoring phase, and the updating phases. And this is, although I made it as like a linear path, of course, we all know this is not a linear path. There are many iterations that takes us back to an earlier stage, and we go forward from there. So the process that we are creating for thinking about ethics longitudinally has to include all these iteration loops as well. And throughout these phases, again, when we are thinking about ethics, we are thinking about all aspects of the AI system as it is being integrated into the game. So we are thinking about how to make sure that the data aspect is ethically used, ethically sourced, ethically protected. What are the algorithms that we are using? What choice of algorithms are we going for? And what are the ethical risks or benefits that we can expect from them? The tool itself, the AI does not just happen. It's not just there as only an AI system. There's a user interface. There's a user experience that's attached to it, especially as we integrated. Here, I think I have to say, like, when we are talking about integration of AI into the gaming, we are not just thinking about the user, the player, playing an AI integrated game, but also the designer who is designing the game using AI systems. So what are the user interfaces that they're engaging with and that they are creating in the game for the players that are, again, like protecting ethics, so to speak. And finally, protecting ethics is a weird way of putting it, protecting our values, making sure that the results are ethically preferable and so on. And finally, there is the practice. How do we engage with the AI systems? How do we create this human-computer interaction in the way that is good, that is beneficial? So that's the broader responsible AI part of things. So now if we get a little bit more specific, let's think about like the games that are going towards extended reality. So I'm gonna do a very philosopher thing and go for like an case that is sort of like packs a lot of ethical issues all at once. So let's think about a game that is using extended reality. And let's add to that biometric tracking, meaning that the system is utilizing gaze tracking to understand where the attention of the player is as the player plays the game. Also heartbeat tracking, so that we understand what excites the player, where the player finds the game enjoyable, exciting, whereas where it becomes stressful. And for that, we can also use detection of skin reaction. So sweating and respiration, all of those. So biometric tracking can basically provide us a lot of information for making the game personalized, making the game safer, avoiding excessive stresses. And if we have the option of having a game that unfolds in reaction to these information, then we can also protect the player from extra stress or addictive behavior as well. We don't want if we don't want the player to play for a very extended period of time, well, that can be tracked, their health information can also be tracked. And let's add to that generative AI as well. As we are developing the game, let's assume that we are using content creation through generative AI systems, meaning that the designer is engaging with an AI system in order to create the content and allow the content to unfold within the game without necessarily the designer being on top of it at all times. Now, and of course, that allows the designer to be create faster, more efficiently, maybe even increase their creativity, because they can sort of like do this collaborative creative process with the generative AI where they can augment their creative capabilities. So that's a good story. Where can it go wrong? So as you can imagine, and as going back to some of the themes that I mentioned at the beginning, there are key ethical concerns that immediately jumps up when we describe this scenario. In terms of agency, once we start knowing a lot about the player and molding and shaping the game in accordance to the player's preferences or weaknesses, there is a lot of power that is placed on the design side, on the company side or the designer side. So basically on the game rather than the user. Because now that we know a lot about where their attention is, where their physical and hence deductively psychological weaknesses are, where they are more likely to fall for loopholes, now we can utilize this. So if we switch it, well, I'm not suggesting that there are evil companies or evil designers, but let's assume that the incentives for profit derives, as we know, more player time, more purchases within games. And all of these, and games that are sort of more and more addictive. So all of these are now easier to make if we have this information about the player. So we can start moving from personalization to manipulation, and we can start controlling the agency of the player in that sense. And we can use attention loopholes. Immediately, again, as we start thinking about bio-tracking, we get into the privacy question. Once I know when a player is getting stressed, getting excited, getting happy, I also know a lot of intimate information about that player. In the sense that I can deduce what are their phobias, what are their desires. And these information, if they are not, well, first of all, does the player want to share this information? Do they even know that this is what can be understood from this type of game setup? But the other thing is, who can access this information? Who can process the data? Who can access the data and process the data in such a way that they can then, third parties I'm thinking about, they can then use this information for ad targeting, or even more, of course, for evaluating them for example, evaluating players in job applications, in educational applications. So who has access? And does the player even know who has access? And of course, the last thing when it comes with privacy, does the player have control? For the player to have control, I'm going now to the transparency side. For the player to have control, the player has to engage with the game with some sort of transparency. So they need to understand what is collected, what's the goal, and what can come out of it, what are the risks. But here, of course, we want to create, like, the goal is not to kill the gaming industry and the fun and the benefits that come out of it. I didn't talk a lot about the benefits because of the time limitation of the time in this talk. But of course, the starting point of this is like, well, we want to make sure that the gaming industry, with all of its, all the values that it offers, remains fun and useful, beneficial. So we don't want to kill that, but how can we make sure that we create some warnings and some control over what the game player is walking into? And for that, again, going up to the safety question, how can we make sure that we prevent harm to users, especially when we are talking about generative AI, when the control on the game, it's not just the control that the player can exercise, but what about the designer's control? And designer's control on both what kind of risks that they might be creating for the players as they use generative AI systems, because we don't really know what kind of outcome the generative AI systems will create. But in addition to that, what kind of IP and creative violations that the designer might be engaging without knowing by using generative AI tools. So, okay, I have just a minute, but I'll try to wrap up quickly. So going back to the responsible AI lifecycle, these are questions that are not uncommon. They are just questions that we see a lot in responsible AI applied to the gaming industry. And gaming industry, of course, comes a lot of extra questions related to what is harm in-game versus what is harm in general. How does in-game harm translate into real harm? So apart from that, though, these questions are quite general questions. And we usually go with thinking about ethics in this very typical applied ethics sense. Well, AI systems impact in terms of individual autonomy. Everything that I just mentioned can be categorized in these three core principles. So individual autonomy, increasing benefit versus minimizing harm, and we want to create social justice. We want to create fair systems that don't discriminate against certain players. So, and using that, we are within that structure, we want to determine what is the right choice, again, from the moment of research until the end of the development and putting the system out there. I'm in Turkey, by the way. If you're hearing background noise, that is call for prayer. So previously what we did at AI Ethics Lab, which is my own initiative outside of Northeastern, we looked at all the AI ethics principles that the countries, companies, academic institutions have put out there. We categorize them under these 4 core principles that come from the traditional bioethics principles. And then we created a tool called the Box to assess AI systems in accordance to these 3 principles, but including multiple instrumental principles. This is the first version of that tool that we are using for risk assessment, ethical risk assessment, and ethical risk impact. And we use this tool by changing the questions. We use them again throughout the AI lifecycle. So you can think of the privacy question at the beginning to be the privacy of the research subjects or the test subjects, whereas in the final stages of the design user interface stages, you can think of it as like what kind of privacy controls are meaningful to give to the users, to the players, or to the designers. So we use this tool, again, keeping an eye on all the stakeholders and keeping an eye on all aspects of the AI system within the context, in this case, of gaming. And a question that we are now, so this is something that we already do. A question that we are working on is, well, how do we communicate the results of this ethics impact, and how much of the results of the ethics impact we should communicate with the consumers? So there are multiple ways that we communicate risks or information to the consumers. It ranges from the very basic movie parental advisory sign, to the nutrition facts of food, to the model cards for AI systems. What is meaningful to communicate to this particular audience in the gaming industry? This is something that we are currently working on. Sorry. 2 more slides. Another thing that we both implement in its basic form and working on as a part of our research project is exactly how we think is the most efficient and seamless way that we can integrate ethics throughout the whole model development that goes into then, if it is in the gaming industry, well, if the AI model how do we make sure that the AI model development happens ethically so that it does not introduce problems that come from the AI system by itself. So this is the draft of the workflow that we have for AI model development that goes into the product lifecycle. So it starts with the product design and it ends with the final product. Although at the core, at the main bulk of it, we are really looking at the AI design here. And finally, the last thing is that in order for all of this to work, we need to integrate ethics into the organization in a way that is meaningful and that is skillful. So we are not trying to turn everyone into ethicists. We are not trying to overburden designers and company leadership with heavy ethical questions and expect them to be able to think like a philosopher. But what we want to create is we want to have organizations, in this case, the gaming companies, that can detect ethical risks, that have designers, that have developers, AI developers, who can detect ethical risks and look for the right way of resolving them. Meaning, at certain stage, it's just detecting the ethical risk and flagging them. But we expect others who are designated people for ethics respondents to be able to use documents and tools that are already integrated into the company structure, which are like the box that I showed, to use those in order to do ethics assessments. And if things get really difficult, to have an ethics team that really works on the dilemma cases and an organizational structure where there is guidance. Because a lot of the ethical questions, as I said, are trade-off questions. So there are no very clear right answers in many cases, but there are company choices which probably should be made clear to the consumer so they know what they are engaging with. And skipping the details of the model, that's all. Thank you very much.